But when we talk about, I think about relationships, and that I've been both hurt deeply in relationships and I've been healed deeply in them. And I think about the marital relationship where those things play out as well.
Yeah.
And just wondering, in all of the landscape of relationships, what makes a good relationship? How do you have all these books out there that's like, how do you divorce proof your
books?
Yeah, so many.
So
3
many
steps to
most of which are probably, you could chalk up as garbage. Most of parenting books, most of the relationship books are just, I get it. People are trying to carve out a space where they can kind of share something. They feel like they've maybe not cornered the market, but have something valuable. And I want people to contribute things that they find valuable. But I think for me, first of all, I agree completely that the marital relationship's the most important relationship I have, period, full stop, hands down. And that's a sort of crossing over from childhood to adulthood where, it's all about peers and friends and best friends and da-da-da.
Yeah.
And then, and then I met my partner, and then the game changed and everything got more real and everything got deeper and everything also got harder. It's I always say it's the most rewarding relationship that we have and the most challenging relationship we have.
Yeah. Yeah.
That, I know that, like anybody that's in relationship that's listening knows that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so awesome and so hard.
Yeah.
Even when it's awesome, it's hard.
And I find that for me at least, that I was constantly bumping in. I still am constantly bumping into myself and realizing that so many of the things that I wanted Michelle to do differently or to change were really just I'm standing in front of a mirror that I'm denying that that's a mirror because hey, I can't. I'm not the messed up one here, and so
here's a painful reality, yesterday, right? Like, let's just go, like, we'll just dive in. Yesterday I'm sitting there and I'm like, it took a minute. Thankfully, this is like the benefit of, long-term personal growth and recovery work is like learning how to pause, right? That gap between thought and action, which in active addiction, we know is just this fusion of thought and action, and there's no pause, there's no contemplation, it's just impulsively, recklessly careening through life. So yesterday I'm like, I need to take a minute here. And I went back and looked at some journaling that I had done, another tool for personal growth. And it was painful. It was like, I talked to my partner about it yesterday, my wife, about, I was going, oh man. Yeah, so these things that were big insights a few months ago, and then again last month, and then you see how readily you can get stuck. And I think you're right. Early on in the relationship, as is the case for most people, it's just so consumed by projection. What you imagine your partner can be, or what you think you need from them, rather than accounting for the work that really is yours to do, so that you can be equipped to actually show up for the relationship.
Yes, that's right.
And, so I think that, maybe that's as good as it gets is the, I don't know, I hope to get better at it, but, where I'm not just looking after the fact and going, oh, that could improve, that could get, but maybe what I mean by as good as it gets is that I have that space now where I can pause. My partner does too. She does a great job of it. Where there's some contemplation of my experience, some looking inward, not just projecting all of that unmet emotional need on to my partner. And then hopefully using that information and insight to actually facilitate change, and to improve and to get unstuck. That's something you and I talk a lot about, particularly as relates to men's work with Hollis. We talk about this idea he references a lot about how stuck we are. That we're often more stuck than we are sick. But that keeps a lot of people from actually seeking help because they think I'm not really that messed up, right? I'm not sick, but it's like, but you're not happy. You're not, not that we're supposed to be happy all the time, but you're stuck, in a cyclical maladaptive pattern.
What are things that keep us stuck in those kind of patterns?
I think so many things. One, I mean, the first thing, the most obvious that anybody with a depth orientation to psychology looks at is what happened then and there impacts the here and now. So psychology's moved beyond blaming parents. This is not about blaming your mother, blaming your father for where things are, but it is about understanding the context of your early developmental environment.
Yes.
Creates the experience and informs so much of the experience, like the messages and expectations that you're bringing into adult relationship, right? So that's the first thing we look at is how are we stuck? I mean, it's the first thing I certainly look at. I think a lot of people that do depth work are looking at how are we stuck recreating the familiar, as in the familial, the early kind of family of origin messages and expectations, right? Like a good example of this would be like, the explicit and implicit message, but often the explicit message in my family system was you're the glue, right? You're going to hold all this together,
hold us
right?
all together.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then I went around my adult life trying to hold it all together and then going, why is if everybody,
it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Right.
And if I'm the glue and I'm putting that everywhere, then it's, things get sticky. And I'm,
right.
And then all these parts are sort of stuck. And so, it's about letting go of early messages and expectations, reevaluating that. I think some of it is also your expectations about other people's, like your beliefs about how you experience the other. So there's how I view you. There's a famous William James quote where he says, when two men meet, there are really six men present. How each man views himself, how each man views the other, and how each man wishes to be seen.
Wow.
Right. And so, anytime we're showing up in relationship, we're showing up with just all of these things that have to be sort of sorted through. My belief about self, my belief about how others will treat me, any kind of projections or, things I've brought into the relationship about, who other people will be or how they'll meet my needs or all of that. So all that's really ripe with opportunities to get stuck.
Yeah. It seems that like there's an idea about marriage in our culture. We get married, relatively young, right? I think 20s and 30s, I know that that's creeping up and getting older, but even when I look back, 30s is young. and so all this energy is going outward to make a name for yourself, to establish your career, to make money, to be successful, all kind of first half of life projects. And you come together with someone that in some ways that you're wanting to help you do that. And often all that energy is going outward, but often what's required of a good relationship is for that energy to go inward, for there to be reflection is what I'm hearing you say. And I'm wondering if some of the unhappiness, divorce, whatever, just comes from the inability at that stage in life to be able to hold those two things together.
Yeah. Well, and of course, like, so if you're driven by, how many times have I sat with people, that are into a second marriage or beyond that, who've said, in this first marriage, I like classic, like, I was gonna say classic Baylor story, like ring by spring, you're 22 and you're, and you're graduating and you're going to get married right away and all this kind of stuff. And so, not to rip on Baylor's great, but this idea that anybody would know what they want to commit to for the rest of their life at 22 is sort of crazy. And yet I met my wife when I was super young and I knew immediately this is who I want to be with. However, the person I'm married to today, 19 years later, that's really different. And thankfully we've really grown in a way that's brought us closer. I feel closer to my wife today, 19 years into marriage and being together than I do.
Oh yeah.
Than I did when we started, and I felt really close to her then,
Right. But it's not always, let me say this. I feel the same way. And there's been seasons in my relationship with Michelle where I haven't felt that.
Oh my gosh.
Like it's been really hard for us.
Yeah.
So is it?
Absolutely.
Okay. So
yeah, I think that's another thing that we need to sort of normalize in our culture is the idea of conflict and challenging seasons of relationship and sort of hanging through that.
Yes.
I think we're so quick to go, well, this doesn't feel good, and it's like, yeah, well, but this goes back to our cultural idea. I mean, this is how we find ourselves in this. I mean, just a kind of a weird connective thread, but how we manage pain. Right?
Yes.
The reason we have a total epidemic around, opioids, right, is because somewhere along the way we believe that we shouldn't be in pain, and it's like, who gave us that idea?
Yes.
Yes. The body hurts, and you're going to be in pain, and you're going to feel feelings that are painful, and relationships are going to be painful and difficult. Even, like I said, even when they're good, they're hard. And I think there's this sort of cultural mythology that's been really, really prevalent for a long time, which is like, if things are good or as they're supposed to be, they should be easy. And it's like, no.
It's not. So tell me, like, and maybe this is too pragmatic of a question in some ways, but tell me, if you're in conflict with your spouse, what are 2, 3, 4 things you should keep your eye on in the middle of that? Because there's a way of either kind of pouring fuel on it. Sometimes it's like, burning down the house, or what are things, if you're wanting to kind of think about, maybe you're in the first 10 years of marriage, what are some of the aptitudes or capacities that are really important to develop in a good fight? No,
that's it. Fair fighting, right? I talk about that a lot with couples. Like, when I do work with couples, I always talk about, what's fair fighting and what's below the belt, right? That has to be stuff that's just off the table. So there's a lot of, and let me just say, when you ask a question like that, the first thing I think of, honestly, is like all the stuff that I do wrong, and then think the opposite of that, right? So I never want to assume that people listening think that I'm like authority in what to do right. Like
I get it,
because I have this experience of my wife in the back of my head going like
she's gonna be listening to this going
like, come on, dude.
We can get her on the phone now. She can
we do a phone a friend on what to do, because she always I always joke that she's like by far my better half, just has so much more kind of insight and so to ask to go back to your question, I think in a really practical sense, and it's going to sound obvious, and yet it's so difficult to do because our culture's not good at it, which is listening. The first thing that we should do in relationship is to listen deeply, and when I get into challenging conflicts in relationship, it generally has to do with my desire to be, go back to that St. Francis prayer. He talks about praying to be understood, to seek understanding than to be understood. And I sort of like flip that on its head and go, well, if you understand me, then all of this will go away. So let me tell you about my
what you're missing in understanding me.
Versus saying, no, my principal job is to listen here. And obviously being a therapist has taught me a lot about how to listen. Your profession the same. We I think at our best try to be aware and empowered witnesses to people's lives.
Yes.
To just hold a space where they're able to reflect and we're able to reflect back to them what it is that we see. So I think, the first step for appropriately managing conflict would be that you do, twice as much listening as you do talking. And then the second piece would be, for me, it would be demonstrating curiosity, right? So we talk about capacity. A lot of the challenges in relationship or conflict in general, I mean, just look at human conflict in general, it would be a lack of mentalization, which is, another way of saying the inability to hold the other person's heart and mind in our heart and mind. So if I'm holding someone's heart and mind in my heart and mind, there's 2 primary characteristics to that sort of mentalizing stance in relationship. And if I'm holding your mind in my mind, the way that I'm demonstrating that is curiosity. So I'm genuinely curious about what's in your mind. The second I begin to imagine what I think you're thinking and then respond as though I know, we foreclosed on an opportunity to be connected, right? We foreclosed on,
Beautiful.
So genuine curiosity would be the holding your mind in my mind. And then empathy would be holding your heart in my heart, right? Which would be, perspective taking, refraining from judgment, recognizing your emotion and touching that place in me that understands that emotional experience, and then conveying the understanding of that. Those are sort of and it sounds more formulaic than it is. I think it's not.
It's beautiful.
Formulaic.
Huh.
I think you can't go through like, well, now I've taken your perspective and now I've offered you, like, it's going to look different.
Now I'm going to pin you to the wall.
Right. It's going to look different based
Right.
on, what's happening, but, and in context. But I mean, those are two principal things. Or three: listening with a really open heart and open mind, being genuinely curious, and being empathically attuned, where you actually sense into what that person's feeling, how you can relate to that feeling, and then conveying your understanding. And here's the other thing too. You said 3 or 4, so I'm going to throw a fourth one in there that I think is really probably really important. And it's like a constant refrain in our house. So if you were a fly on the wall in our house with my wife and I talking to our children, you'd hear, say how you feel, ask for what you need, right? So we want to teach our children how to be able to not only have emotions, but be able to reflect on what's happening for them and be able to communicate that in a way that has people get them. And then we want them to be able to ask for what they need, to be, to have a sense of agency, and to be clear about, what it is that they need. And I find that a lot of adults are not particularly great at that. And you see it show up in all these like problematic ways. It's usually like really passive aggressive or sarcastic communication. It's really like, oh yeah, sure, thanks. I'll get right on. It's like it's a lot of that kind of communication and relationship versus saying, hey, that doesn't feel right to me. I don't want to do that right now, but I can do that at this time. Really direct, or even more so like asking for what people need. Like a lot of times people project their unmet needs, but don't actually clearly articulate that explicitly. Like, hey, I'm really wanting to be connected to you right now, and what that would look like is this.
Right.
So we go about,
but we try to get that in
way.
different ways that are not, is that because we're disconnected from that often? So it comes out in the form of either sulking or anger or stonewalling or whatever those things are. But really underneath it is like, I really want to be connected.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's coming out in a not helpful way.
In a weird way. Yeah. This is a weird way of feeling connected. Yeah. John Gottman, John and Julie Gottman, great. If we talked at the top of this about books.
Yes.
Like all the books out there on couples and da-da-da. The Gottmans have actually provided so much rich content for us, through longitudinal research of couples over 40 plus years. They have thousands of data points now in terms of the number of couples they've worked with. And so one of the classic books in couples therapy is 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. The Gottmans have written several things since then, but you can get that book, probably same day delivered on Amazon, and and it's worth it. It's like, it's not expensive. It's absolutely worth the time and energy to invest in that. And one of the things that they talk about across all the research with couples is, the Four Horsemen. For those of you, anybody that's done couples work has probably encountered these, but it's an important reminder, which is criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Yeah. Right. These are the Four Horsemen in kind of relational, the Four Horsemen of the apocalypse and relationship. Yeah. And you can generally
say those again slower.
Yeah. Criticism.
Huh.
Contempt.
Check.
Yeah. Check. Yeah. Contempt.
Yes.
Defensiveness. Stonewalling.
Yeah.
And you can find all 4 of those in any relationship, including mine. So it's not a matter of you're doing a good job or not doing a good job, if these things are present or not. It's how much you're attending to those things and letting them sort of unconsciously run the show versus noticing it and being able to go, ooh, I didn't like how I showed up in that. Let's try again. Right. My knee-jerk reaction generally when my partner is sharing something personal and meaningful to me because of the early messaging around "you're the glue," is I feel defensive, like I haven't done something right. So you want to talk about not being heard? It's like, what's a great way to not hear somebody? They tell you something deeply personal and vulnerable, and you defend yourself. It's like, and if you're an observer, like when I'm in the observer position, like as a witness to a couple's work, I can see it so clearly. It's like, whoa, you don't need to defend anything, because they're not attacking you. They're just telling you that they need you to show up and hear that they're sad.
Yeah.
They're not saying, I'm sad because
you've done something. Yeah, right.
They're saying, I'm sad. And so how do you reflect understanding and ask questions about their sadness rather than getting defensive or whatever? So, I think, and now we've gone on the circuitous route. I don't remember what your question was, but those things are always things I'm looking for in couples work, is where those things are present and how we start to sort of remove those from the equation so that we can actually create a space where two people can really meet and connect.
Yeah. I grew up in as you know, in a kind of a really super religious structure. And one of the like the phrases that the Bible uses about relationships is this hardness of heart. And when I read Gottman's work about those four things, I was like, oh, that operationalizes how my heart gets hard towards a person I'm in a relationship with, towards my wife or my children or a friend, when these things are present. And is part of the step is how you begin to notice when those are present in your own life. Your ability to practice some critical awareness, to look inward, right? So much of this, I think, is informed by just a lack of contemplative space. And if you look at our culture, again, not only are we not good at listening, but we're not good at spending time in contemplation for the most part. Most people, if you talk to them day to day, and maybe your listenership is different, given the cross section of people, but for the most part, very few people have like a contemplative practice in our culture where they like sit and are still and go, what's that about? Like we're usually just like, all right, what's next? What's my, and then the next thing and the next thing. And I'm guilty of that. Like I was doing like a mindfulness minute to start out our team call this morning. I started a team call for our one of our clinical teams this morning, and we do like a mindfulness piece. And my wife's sitting there like laughing at me in the background, like, you're like off camera,
putting your boots on while you're, like, and we're gonna take a minute, and then I had to laugh at myself and go like, all right, stop what you're doing, just okay, be present, so that's sort of our first. I think that's one of the first barriers I think we have to address, is just our unconsciousness, how much of it's just sort of bounce through the day, more or less not really being conscious of like how we're spending our time. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the best money that Michelle and I ever spent was, and I really encourage couples to do this, is I think premarital is really okay. It's not great, but I really encourage couples to spend the first year of their marriage in therapy. As if like if I was, if I was going to go to the Olympics, I'd have a coach. I would go, and if this is the single most important relationship I'd ever have, I would think that, and I think there's a difference between therapy and chemotherapy. And most people wait to go to marital therapy when it becomes chemotherapy, when you're trying to kill something that is like
a good point.
Developed in your life.
That's a good point. There's like a cancerous growth that's consuming the relationship and then threatening to tear it apart. And so you actually have to like, that's I had never thought about it quite in those terms. All the times we've talked, that's never come up, but that's interesting. I think you're right. We have to think about, I mean, so this is, and you see this trend in, not in all medicine, but in kind of the circles where it is preventative care, right?
Yep.
So like, we can get out in front of a lot of this stuff. We don't have to wait for it to be bad in order for it to be good.
Right.
Like it could just be good if you
Yeah.
want. I mean, it'll be hard.
Sure.
You'll have to encounter challenging things, but it doesn't have to get really bad. And that's one of the things that I think this is changing for a younger generation. The social stigma around help seeking has shifted dramatically across generations.
Okay.
So young people today are unabashed and completely unashamed about seeking mental health care.
Yes.
For the most part.
Yeah.
Even if their parents are like, ooh, they're like, don't care. This is what we do. We're going to do therapy and it's important. And, you know, and I see that a lot with young adults that I work with. They carry much less social stigma and shame around help seeking. But people, you know, in kind of, I'm going to say older generations, as in not youth today, but middle age and older. Middle-aged folks and older generally have more stigma around help seeking, and they think that they fail to see behavioral health care and seeking like therapeutic support as preventative care. And they see it more as responding to a problem. And if it gets really, really bad, then we'll have to go seek help, right? Versus like, or we could just do that now when it's not really, really bad and get the tools so that it doesn't get really, really bad.
Right.
You know,
to see it as a relationship coach rather than a doctor where surgery is needed to cut something out.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
That's really, so Michelle and I did that early on, kind of stumbled into it because we were in seminary and we were in California and therapy was super cheap. And we went our first year, like every week that we were married. And it was, I think I
wanted to make a California joke. Like
thank you.
Yeah.
It didn't save us from problems, but I think it gave us the tools when we got to these almost irretractable problems that both of us came into the marriage with, that I was blinded by, and I was hoping that Michelle was going to save me. Yeah. And then I come across that line from Mary Oliver 100 years later, that the only life you can save is your own. You know, and I realized, these problems that I came into asking to be healed from with another person is really my responsibility. Yeah. It's my journey. And that she didn't forsake me in the mid my journey, and I wouldn't forsake her in the mid of her journey, gave us a context to be together and walk with each other. But it was really difficult. Yeah. You know, and I think those tools helped. In some ways, I think therapy is getting two people in a room and a therapist saying, okay, and it's like a crazy, living room with everything's just all over the floor. Yeah. And you say, everybody take your own stuff back to your own rooms. Yeah. Because half of the stuff I'm bringing in is just my stuff. Yeah. That I'm wanting it to be her problem. And it took me a long time to take my stuff to my own room and to say, this is mine. I got to work on my own defensiveness or my inability to, ask for what I need or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And it, admittedly, it's taken me and continues to take me longer than I would have liked, I think that's worth sort of noting is like, that we have a tendency in talking about this to probably talk about it in the past tense, but this is work we're still doing all the time, like day in, day out, week in, week out.
This morning.
And like I was talking about yesterday, this is like happening in real time. But I'll tell you, doing that work yesterday made the connection this morning feel much different. The ease with which we could communicate, the honesty with which we could communicate, so, that's worth noting that if you're willing to do and show up for the difficult part of relationship, there is a payoff. It's not, and the payoff is that that person is uniquely equipped to understand you in a way that nobody else can. Yes. Nobody, you and I are close and we have a deep personal relationship that's been fostered over years, and that doesn't hold a candle to the intimacy and the quality of relationship that you have with your wife, which again comes all the way back to, if this is the most important relationship you have, how are you not investing in it? Like you do preventative maintenance on your car. right? Like you change the oil, you wash it, you
on your dog.
You do preventative maintenance with your dog. Yeah. Like you go to the dentist, like you do these things that are seen as like just normal. Like that's the conversation we should probably be having, is like, how do we make sure that everybody knows that they could just go do therapy, just like oil changes and washing their car and every other thing that they do to prevent things
every 3 months
from breaking down or depreciating over time. And I mean, that would be the ideal, right? If we're really making those kind of investments, and it's so worth it. I've never made a more worthwhile investment than when I spend time working on my relationship with my wife. And by extension of that, my family and the work we do with our children. Which, by the way, can't feel like work. It's got to feel like play. And that's another thing I've been sitting with since we had Ross Ellenhorn come. Last month or something like that. I think it was a month ago. Ross is a friend of mine that owns Ellenhorn, which is an awesome program. They have programs in Boston and New York and LA. And Ross has written a great book. You should definitely pick it up, called The Art of Drawing Life. And it's based on Harold and the Purple Crayon. Do you remember that?
Yeah, sure.
Kids book.
Sure.
And it's really about, agency and creating this life that we have. And a lot of it's about play. He just came into this talk about play is serious business. And we talked about, he talked about 4 levels of kind of intersect. We could go on a tangent with this, but he talked about the ineffable, the liminal, the noumenal, and the noetic. And it was beautiful.
Those are terms that nobody uses.
Okay.
So it's like
okay. So you use them, but let's
but I'm just saying, like I'm sure people are like, what the hell is that?
Yeah, is that English? yeah. So let's talk, if you want, we could sidebar and talk about these for a second.
Yeah.
So the ineffable is sort of that idea, that thing that sort of escapes words, that you can't speak it, but it's felt. It's that, and a lot of that can be thought of, that sort of springboards us into the liminal, that space between us, that space where God is happening, in that divine presence is happening, the connection in that space between us. And it's often we go through periods of liminality where we're in between things. Bill Curley calls it the no longer and the not yet. And that space that we are suspended in between. And then the noumenal is that place where, a good example for me is like when something has this numinous quality of like I talk about like seeing, like being moved by art. That was like, I remember being with Maria in Paris at the Rodin Museum and seeing this bust of Venus, and I just started weeping because it's like couldn't even explain it, but it was like this thing which Ross would say is in the pleroma, the non-living, becomes something in the creatura, something living. And it's endowed with something that feels numinous. I don't know.
Is numinous spirit? Is it what is that? What's the root of this? That when I look at a sunset or a child or something that's outside of me, and all of a sudden I'm welled up with a deep sense of connection or biggerness,
and some of that crosses over, like what are the, some of that you could say is the ineffable or what, but and then the noetic is this part of it's really transformative experience. And the larger point that Ross was making that was so great was that play is transformative. That when you can engage all of this, even difficult things, in a way that's really about like, how do we play with this? How do we hold? And adults are so bad at that.
Terrible.
I mean, I'm around, we have, Maria and I have 5 young girls, and they're amazing, and they play, and I get to see what, but a lot of times I'm looking in like, oh my gosh, yeah, like this is what we're, missing. And so I was telling you about the men's retreat, and we can get into some of that about our November retreat, where this is where we focused our attention, was all about play.
Mm-hmm.
How do men play together?
Yeah.
Like in a way that's not about degrading somebody or competing, but like genuine, like unencumbered play, where you could be yourself and sort of give yourself over to that and have an experience. And we had such a great time. Just like, I led this retreat with men in November, and we spent the weekend playing together, and it was so much fun. And the men are still reaching out, talking about it. And I was saying right before we went on, like, the guys were texting yesterday, like, let's do this again.
Let's do it again. Yeah.
This is fun.
Yeah.
And the reason I was bringing this up in relation to marital work is that I think relationship work should also be fun. We shouldn't just be slogging through it. It should be really, really fun.
Yes.
It can be really painful and difficult, but it can also be really fun and really rewarding. And if you can encounter difficult things in a playful way, it really changes the landscape of how you can engage one another.
Yes.
Like I can almost, like the best moments in a relationship are probably where I can laugh at myself and go like, oh my gosh, do you hear that? And my wife's like, yeah.
So yeah.
Like, those are great moments.
They're great moments. But there's a sense in which you have to have you have to feel safe. I have to feel safe for that to happen. I have to be in a place where there's not a gotcha at the end of that, or a shame payoff. But that's that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
It's huge. One of the things I was going to ask you is that, and I don't know if I learned this from you or from Jim Hollis, but there's that, and thinking about like first half of life spirituality, and also really I think first half of life relationships versus kind of that transition into second half of life, both spirituality and relationship, that either you or he has talked about like the magical other, and that how often we touched on this, but it's I've been thinking about this a bit, and I wanted to bring it up and have you talk about it or explain it. But that sense in which we often are attracted to someone to save us, and we want them to make us whole, to fulfill us. The Hebrew understanding is you're born with half a heart, and you marry someone that's your other, and you become, the two shall become one, all those kind of things.
Sure.
And so there's a desire from every rom-com I've ever seen to every slow dance I've ever been to in the 80s, that there's going to be someone out there, in Chicago, the group Chicago promised me this was going to be true, was going to complete me, right?
Yeah.
And then you show up in relationship.
Yeah.
And you realize at some point there's not a magical other. There's just another. And that the work is my work. And that really sucks. I just want to say that because I really want someone.
I like the idea where
to
somebody
fix me.
Yeah. No, I like that part. So now this gets, if we use the example, I think I can most readily kind of relate to this in my work with men. So we can kind of, and obviously it has implications for the marital relationship too. But in men's work, we talk about this a lot. You and I have done this work. In fact, earlier this year, we led a study. Several people from, many people from the Crossing and from Chapelwood came, as well as people from my practice came. It was awesome. And it was Under Saturn's Shadow, a book, James Hollis's book about the wounding and healing of men. And in it, he sort of outlines eight secrets that men carry in their hearts. One, that they live a life governed by fear, which they bury deep inside them, and it generally shows up as anger. Anger is usually for men just camouflage for fear. And then the piece that he really hones in on is this idea that in order for men to grow up, to not be boys longing for their mother, is that they have to address the mother complex. And what we mean by that is the concentration of energy we carry around the feminine. So this isn't about, complex has gotten a really bad rap. That word complex in our culture means, oh, you got a complex.
Right.
Like it's a pathologizing word, but that's not the way in which Jung intended it. When Carl Jung spoke to the idea of a complex, he just meant a concentration of energy.
Yeah.
Right. So when I say a mother complex, I'm just saying a concentration of energy around how we think about mothers, and more broadly, the maternal, and even more broadly, the feminine, and our relationship to the feminine. And so, so in order to show up as an adult in relationship, not projecting all of these things, because what you're talking about is a boy who has a great mother,
yes,
and then wants to make that his partner, and that's not what an adult relationship requires. It's not you looking for mommy to take care of you. It's you growing up, facing the reality that you're sort of, having to go through, as we talk about a lot in our work with men, a meaningful rite of passage in which you grow up and sort of figure out, what your unique contribution to the world is.
Yes.
And then return to the relationship ready to give, and not just take things. Right. A lot of where I see men go wrong in relationship is that they show up with an expectation or many expectations about who their partner ought to be for them. And they show up with a desire to take more than they're willing to give. And that can be women too. I'm not trying to single men out. I think right. That's, I think women can do that. I think men can do that. So we have to, transcend. He talks about transcending the mother complex. We got to move through where we're stuck in that regard, and when we do that, we create an opening where we can have an adult relationship, where my love can be bigger than my need, where my desire to give to the relationship can be, or live deeper into my values, can be bigger than the fear that I live with.
That's good.
Right?
That's good.
So that's, I think, what we're trying to do in this work.
That's I just want to pause it, because what you've just said is like, there's a world in that, and that often we come into those relationships wanting the other to take care of us, and we don't realize that really the mark of that relationship, a gun goes off that I never heard it when I got married. For years, did not hear it, that really the summonsing was for me to grow up. Yeah. It wasn't for this other person to meet all of the needs that I had internally. And when I realized that, I was like, well, all that, I don't like this. Yeah. But also, it was the best thing that ever happened.
Sure. This is, speaking of complexes, one of the complex that a lot of men get stuck in, and particularly type 7s like you and I. Don't know if you're public about that, if you're out as a 7, but I'll out you that you're a type 7 through and through. You're a 7 with a 7 wing. Like classic enthusiast. But one of the things that we can get stuck in is the puer, the Peter Pan complex. The idea of, being lost boys. That are just looking for fun things and never growing up.
Avoiding pain.
How do we avoid painful things and do things, And so a lot of what I was just saying, like about having fun and stuff, that actually comes a little bit more easy to me. Like some of it is like, actually, I need to slow down and attend to my pain, but which is where we started the conversation. But anyway, my point in that is that, a lot of us can get really caught up in that kind of puer complex, or what people, the cultural idea we have for that is Peter Pan, and Lost Boys, and the idea of never wanting to grow up, and so we have to cross this threshold where it's like, we're gonna have to grow up, and in doing that, we're gonna have to face some painful realities about ourselves and about the other, and the extent to which the other can save us, and the degree to which we'll have to show up to save ourselves, or turn ourselves over to a power greater than ourselves to save us, or however that looks in people's work. But that really is the culminating event in a rite of passage, is that you do grow up, And you turn your attention from taking to giving. And understand your capacity for giving, which a lot of people have not done. They're still, I mean, even into middle adulthood and even older age, they're still trying to see how much they can take from the world.
Yes.
And then wondering why they're so unhappy.
Yes.
It's like, well,
yes.
could look at that.
Right.
Like that's probably right there.
Right. One of the things we've kind of stumbled on at the crossing is this and it wasn't designed to be this way, but it's like a rich ecosystem of intergenerational relationships.
Yeah.
And realizing that I didn't realize how much I needed to be surrounded by folks that were squarely older than I am, have worked through some of the angst of that, and also younger, and that the relationships in that little community we're building, much like the ones that you and I have been a part of and have been really thinking through a lot, is like the richness about having elders and younger brothers and sisters.
Right.
And that flow of, not in terms of top down, but there's just experiences that in some ways we metabolize in those spaces that make us more healthy.
Yeah. So maybe we could talk about groups in general here and why they're so important. So whether it's a faith community or a psychotherapy group or a recovery community or a fitness community, I mean, whatever that is for you, and maybe it's many of those things. Hopefully it is. I want to just note. I want to come back to this idea about why relationships are so important. Maybe that would help round out why the community part is so meaningful. So, so part of what you're talking about, this intergenerational community that you've created at the crossing, why that's so important is that you have people who are further along in the journey, who can speak to their knowledge and experience and their capacity for discernment. We call that wisdom. Who can leverage their wisdom and offer you a different path forward, which is so meaningful. And then people who are younger than you, who you can mentor, because young people need mentors, and part of how we metabolize the understanding of our experience is trying to articulate it to the other. So that's the privileged position of being being a healer, whether you're a therapist or a pastor, is that, we're talking to people about their lives, but invariably, the person who's the guide is also getting a lot of, we're seeing ourselves reflected in the other all the time.
Yes.
So it's a real position of privilege in that way, but that community, there's so many people that are not getting that, right? Social media does not provide that. That's not a community that's available to you online.
No.
That's not a community that's available to you in little sound bites and bits and pieces. It's real relationships that are cultivated over time.
Yes.
And that requires that, we talk about must be present to win. We're not getting this stuff by osmosis. We can't read about being in community. You actually have to show up, put in the time and the energy and the effort, and then you over time get to really reap the rewards of what it's like to be a part of a meaningful community in which you get things emotionally, spiritually, and developmentally, and you give things in the same. And that reciprocity. We've been talking about this in the book study we're doing now on braiding sweetgrass, where Robin Kimmerer says, when you have a healthy community, it's really grounded in reciprocity.
Yes.
And when there's reciprocity present, then flourishing is mutual. Everyone benefits. Everybody flourishes.
That's right.
And if you're seeing aspects of larger culture where people are not flourishing, it has to do with a lack. I mean, among many other things, there's large social ills and things, but we can see at the heart of it probably there's somewhere in there's a lack of reciprocity.
Yes. Yeah. I'm realizing too, like in my relationship with you, and then the things we're doing here as well at Chapel of the Crossing and some other places, that often particularly as we move into midlife to the second half of life, that we have not done a good job with accumulative knowledge, with wisdom, of passing that on relationally, right? So I was thinking about this the other day. My son's science book is different than the science book I grew up with, is different than the science book my father grew up with, definitely different than the one my grandfather did, right? So we have this accumulated knowledge that when I sit down and I study science, it's been passed down. But we enter into these families and into these systems, into these bodies and cultures, and it's not as if someone sat me down and said, hey, let me tell you about this family system. It really is governed by shame and secrets. And you're going to want to hold on to secrets because of the way that, these are some of the things, nobody did that. Right. And so I think that partly what spiritual communities can do, what therapeutic communities like the ones that you're pouring your life in can do, is to help articulate some accumulated knowledge, right, that summons us past these kinds of, I guess, younger parts, or I don't know how you want to.
Yeah. So, so just to think about that for a second, because I think you've articulated that really well. When we think about, like, I guess just if everybody could picture their family of origin and imagine what it would be like if you had the elder statesman or the matriarch of your family system sit down and transmit the intergenerational history. And when you think about it, like, so for the longest time we lived in tribal groups. Much of the world still lives in smaller tribal communities. Now we live in these vast metropolitan areas, which I think cities are not a good idea. I'm going to throw that out. I think cities are. I'm increasingly convinced that, like, that if you have a kind of conscious, tight-knit rural community, that it can be much more adaptive and functional than it has its problems, but for sure, people in rural areas are like, well, let me tell you, but I'm increasingly convinced that cities are not really great for our well-being. But besides that little side, so when we think about this idea of community historically, and Hollis writes about this, in fact, when he talks about tribal groups, that a meaningful rite of passage has to do with teachings, and that the teachings generally centered around three things: God and the cosmos, trying to understand our experience in a larger sense, the existential wonderings of being human, the oral history and tradition of our people. It's like the passing down of information. And then literally teachings about, like, life, like, which historically in small tribal groups would have been like the agricultural or hunting practices of a people. And now we're really separated from all of those things, right? We don't do a good job about oral histories and traditions within our family systems. We often are don't even do a great job talking about God and the cosmos. And we don't do a good job equipping, like, everybody sort of points the finger, like, good example of this about, like, I said hunting and agricultural practice, but it could be just the activities of daily living, like school. We have deferred too much to our educational system. Imagining that they're going to teach our kids all of this. And then we fail to teach them, like, basic financial literacy. And so if you go and ask schools, like, who do you think should be responsible for teaching financial literacy? They're like, parents. And then if you ask parents, they're like, oh, schools. And then everybody's kind of doing this with, like, really important things, like balancing a checkbook, and then we wonder why, as Brene is often talking about, why we're the most, like, overweight, indebted, addicted country, in the history of human experience.
Why do we do this? All right.
Because we've lost connection to that, that transmission of knowledge and experience. And so you're right. I think if you're not getting that in a family system, and I hope that people will take heed of that and maybe try to attend to that in their family of in their family of choice, how they're raising a family, how they're living in a family and existing. But in a broader context, how do you create a community in which you live, whether it's a faith community, a recovery community, a therapeutic community, that fosters that kind of transmission of information and knowledge?
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's part of that intergenerational beauty of having folks that are older and younger, because that's in our culture that has a tendency to stick us in a cohort, or like you had said, whether it's in social media or just the busyness, we're not giving in to those things as much.
Right.
And I'm finding a lot of that wisdom exists in those places where there are folks that are down the road farther and are just coming up on it, and there's a beauty in all that. So, yeah. I was placeholding for this earlier. What do you have on time? No, I'm good.
What is it?
It's 12:15, 12:12.
12:12.
You're gonna have to go.
I gotta go.
I know.
Yeah. In fact, I gotta go pretty much now. Pretty much now. Yeah, pretty now. Like 12 minutes ago. But no, I've got to go talk at Post Oak School with Will. Actually, Will and I are going over to Post Oak to visit with the kids about the gut brain connection and also about relationships. So one last kind of thought then that so we're talking about communities. The thing that I would say in even smaller than when people think community, they think something relatively large. I think a community of peers. I think about it more in small group.
Yes.
Numbers, like 8 to 10.
Yes.
That if you have 8 to 10 people to navigate the world with, that's a game changer. Like we have our group. You and I are in a group together. We've been in a group for several years. And there are many people, and I've been in many groups throughout the years. I would say that small group work, whether it's a therapy group or a peer facilitated group or support group, although I think more exploratory psychotherapy groups are really helpful. A small group like that, 8 to 10 people, that you can go really deep with, and not just the survey course, not an inch deep and a mile wide, but really kind of plumb the depths of your intrapsychic experience with. That's a game changer for personal and kind of relational development.
Absolutely.
I think groups have taught me more about how to be a partner in relationship than anything else.
Yes. Yes.
And I think they've taught me more about, in some ways, being a parent, being a partner, being a boss, all those things, because you have the benefit of witnessing other people going through that, learning from their experiences, learning from their mistakes, learning from the things that they're good at. And so if there was one thing that I would want people to leave with, is that investing in their relationship is the most important thing they can do. That there's particularly their primary relationship with a partner, husband, wife, and that small group work or being a part of a meaningful community is next to their relational work with a partner is the second most important thing they could focus on. And those relationships will be the most protective factor against illness over the course of their entire life.
Yeah.
So when you look at all the research on longevity, all the research on health and well-being and to aging, the single greatest determinant factor for health is not whether you're a smoker. It's not whether you have resources. It's actually whether or not you have relationships. Yeah. Which is crazy. It's nuts. Crazy. I mean, when you really think about it, like a poverty of relationships is a better predictor of health outcomes than poverty itself.
Wow.
Yeah, that's based on Bruce Perry's research and all this national data that we've collected on adverse childhood experiences. We know now that having strong social relationships, and not social media style like 1,000 people that you're connected to, but like 2 to 3 relationships that are
ride or die, go to the mat on anything, like people. Yes.
That if you have those, your expectations for health outcomes are just vastly different. Even if you've had a lot of adverse childhood experiences like death, or early loss of a parent, abuse, neglect, exploitation, all these things that sort of throw off the developmental trajectory. Even if you've had those things, if you can develop strong relationships in adulthood, it's the most protective factor for health outcomes long term.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. That seems like the only work that seems to be important when that gets into view, you know?
Yeah.
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 Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
I know
thank
you've got
you.
to run.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you and your wisdom and your friendship and all that you do. And I really encourage people to get into one of your groups, which has helped transform my life. And I mean, you're a gift to this community, Robert.
Thank you. I feel the same about you. When you're talking about intergenerational communities earlier, it's like it's one of the, I have this mentor who says that the vision that he holds for his life is that when he dies, that there are more groups than when he started. And I think that's such a great vision.
It is a great vision.
I think you're an embodiment of the fulfillment of that vision. I think you've created things that will and have outlived even your involvement in them. And you've brought so many groups of improbable friendships and connections together. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good.
We plug that thing that you wanted to plug.
Oh, yeah.
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 Yeah. So I talked earlier about our retreats. We've got several retreats coming up into 2024. We've got a January retreat that you and I are doing together.
Yes.
It's for men and women. Couples can come, although it's not. We're not there to do couples work, but couples are welcome to attend the retreat together. It's going to be in Round Top, Texas, MLK weekend. So January 12th through the 14th.
Yeah.
So there are some spots available for that, and it'll be you and me and Ernest Patterson and Elena Smith and Tyler Ward. So it's a big crew of facilitators. And then we'll have one in April. I don't have the dates in front of me, but we'll do a spring retreat that will include, that'll be a men's retreat. And I believe John Price is going to do it with us. So
that's great.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
And we usually have one later in the summer and then a fall retreat as well.
Okay.
And we'll do another one of those. We did our first annual, we called it, it was a men's blast and cast weekend, and it was the whole deal about having fun. And we went and duck hunted. I said I'm probably the only therapist in America that's out duck hunting and fishing with, but that's
handing his clients firearms.
but it was such an amazing
Yeah,
experience.
yeah.
We had so much fun,
Yeah.
and we did meaningful work around a fire, and it was great.
That's wonderful.
So all of those are coming up. Most of those I do with you, and then we've also been hosting these book studies, which have been really rich and meaningful. So I hope people will find an opportunity to get involved.
Tell us about Ethos and about Logos.
Yeah. Ethos, Pathos, Logos. We have our so Ethos is our behavioral health group that Will Davis and Stacey Torn and I started several years ago now, and it's really expanded to include child and adolescent service. So we have children and adolescent services at Woodway. Our Woodway location, not too far from here. We have locations now in Westlake and Austin. We're servicing Austin. We have the Prairie Recovery Center, which you know about, which is our, you and I do a spiritual care group there every week. Sometimes you do it solo. Sometimes I do it solo.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get a wonderful opportunity to do it together. But that's our 30-bed mixed gender facility for men and women suffering with primary substance use issues. We have our mental health primary Pathos program, which is intensive outpatient for people needing more outpatient support than just once a week psychotherapy, but are looking to do insight-oriented work. And then Logos is something that really was a brainchild of our work together over the course of the last year. I've really brought it to fruition, where we've been having, you and I for years have talked about how do we create meaningful community in small groups, and that's where the retreats fall under that umbrella, and the book studies fall under that umbrella, and as well as kind of this level of service that's a little bit different than what's out there, which is the concierge behavioral health. So what I saw in medicine was this push back towards direct primary care, where physicians are saying, look, our caseloads are too big to actually be a good doctor and have a good relationship with our patients. So we're going to change this to a subscription model, reduce the number of patients, but increase the quality of care dramatically, and increase the accessibility with which we can be available to patients. And that's essentially what I've done over the last year with Logos is change the model, kind of turn the model on its head. I mean, you don't often need your therapist when you're scheduled to see your therapist. You need them when you're in acute difficulty.
You're right.
And so how do you create a space where that's possible?
That's great.
That's sort of what I've been working on, and what you have been such a vital part of bringing together. And again, it brings me back to being so thankful for our relationship and our work together.
It's been great for me. And I mean, because one of the things I've realized is that most people, somebody came to me and said, I don't need another lap around Galatians. I've got it.
Yeah.
I've got the knowledge. What do I do in these situations? And it really was about the growth of how do you internalize your spiritual life to really grow up.
Right.
And I don't know, I'm sure
like most people are not looking to become biblical scholars.
Yes.
They want to know like how to not yell at their kids.
Yeah.
Right? Like, or how to like be a better partner.
How to become more vulnerable. All those kind of things that
Yeah.
often the church doesn't know what to do with
Yeah.
besides hand you another Bible study, which I don't want to put that down at all.
Careful.
But, but there is a sense in which like, how do we grow up? And I think that what you're doing and the places that you're creating are allowing both, I think, the therapeutic community, and I would even say the church, the spiritual community, to say, okay, that's a model. That's how we do this kind of integrated work and begin to move forward in both kind of, processes and ritual and relationship.
Yeah.
All those things are profound.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Thank you
for being here.